In this lesson, I will show you how you can use a spreadsheet to quickly perform multiple calculations. This is very useful because we will often do experiments that will require a great deal of repetitive calculations, and we will want to avoid wasting a ton of time entering values into a calculator. So before we do anything, I have opened up Google Sheets, and this is what we will normally use in the class. Over here on the right-hand side, I've pasted an image of the equation that we plan to solve here. Now, in our experiment, what we have done here is we have collected a bunch of masses indicated by M. And in the experiment, we had these different masses. In the experiment, we also had these masses spinning in a circle in a particular radius. And now in all the cases, the radius will be 1.2 meters as indicated in the box here. This radius is indicated by this R value in the equation. And as a result, we also measured some speeds as they spun around. Now, we won't explain how we got these speeds, but the speeds that we measured were as follows. These speeds are designated by v, or velocity, and we see that it's a v squared in the equation. What our goal here is to do is to show you how you could take these values of mass, velocity, and radius and turn them into a force without having to do it in a calculator. Now, we could do it in a calculator quite simply because we could just insert the 100 into the M value. We could substitute the 1.2 into the R value. We could substitute the 7.2 into the V value and perform our proper order of operations and easily solve this out. But the spreadsheet can do this quickly for us because we don't have to repeatedly do this. So most notably, the first thing that we would reckon, or that we would see here, is that mass, when we use this calculation as we get deeper into the year, we'll see that the mass is not allowed to be done in grams. It must be done in kilograms in order to make the units work. So the first thing we would have to do is convert this mass that's in grams to mass in kilograms. And this is where a spreadsheet comes in useful. What you will notice here is that in this box, I can turn this box into a calculator by simply clicking on it and then pressing the equal sign on my keyboard like so. Okay, so when I hit equals, it activates as a calculator. Now up here in the f of x button, we see that this is where our function or our typing would go. And what we're looking to do is take this 100 and turn it into kilograms. Now we hopefully know that the mass to kilogram, or I'm sorry, the grams to kilograms conversion is to divide by 1,000. So one thing I could do is I could take the number 100 and I could divide it by 1,000. Now what this is actually doing is that this is acting just like a calculator would. I type the number and I divide it by 1,000 and I get an answer of 0.1. Now, what this doesn't do for me, though, is now I have to do this again. Now, down here, this handle that's right here, if I take this handle, this little dot, and I pull it down, it will apply this formatting to every number below. And what we will see is it's going to give me 0.1 every single time. Now, that actually doesn't seem to make much sense. But if we look at the contents of the cells, what it's telling me is that in this box below, it also took the number 100 and divided it by 1,000. And this box took the number 100 and divided it by 1,000. And if I click on each box, I see it did the same thing. But that's not what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do was to take this particular mass and divide it by 1,000. And we want this to repeat for each. So we want this to be 200 divided by 1,000. So what we did here is not actually exactly correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this out and show you how you actually should properly place this in here. We still are going to use that equal sign. Okay, so when I click on the equal sign, that turns it into a calculator. And instead of just entering data, I'm now going to process the data. I'm going to take this 100, but I don't want to type the number 100. I want to take the contents of this cell. Now, if we look, this cell is A2. So if I click on it, it tells me that I'm going to take whatever content is in A2 and use that value. So in this case, it would be 100. And I'm going to divide it by 1,000. And if I hit enter, I get that 0.1 that I had before. But now if I use this handle and I pull it down, what we will see here is that it now gives me values that seem to make sense because 200 divided by 1,000 was indeed 0.2. If I click on each cell, you can see what it did. It took a 3 and divided it by 1,000. Whereas this one took A2. So what this handle is doing is when I pull it down, it applies the same calculation, but to the next row. So this one, when I click on it, should say A4 divided by 1,000. And this one here is A7 divided by 1,000. So I can see that it did all my calculations, and notice how rapid it did this. Now, in this experiment, the next thing that we might do is we might say, okay, I don't want to make this totally repetitive. I had the same radius all the time. Well, the spreadsheet's nice in that I don't have to keep typing 1.2. If I just use this fill handle and pull down, because it was just a set number, it will also fill in with that number. So we see 1.2 is used. So all my numbers are filling in nice and quick. Now, the final thing that I need to do is I need to calculate this force from this data that we had. And now we can use our equation. Now, we said the way that we do this is we simply click on this on the cell and we hit the equal sign. That turns it into a calculator. And all we need to do now is just make sure the calculation is set properly. We said that we're supposed to take the mass. Okay, the mass should be in kilograms, so it's this value. So I'm going to click on the value in cell B2. All right, my operation that I'm supposed to perform. And now, by the way, on a spreadsheet, please make sure you're aware of this. You must use proper formatting. You have to use the proper symbols. In math class, for example, if you had variables that you multiplied, sometimes we omit the multiplication sign. We cannot do that here. Okay, parentheses also cannot be neglected when necessary. So I'm going to use the Shift 8 key. That's the star. That's going to be our symbol for times. So I want to take this content, the mass, and I want to times it by the V squared. Now the V is in this cell, D2. So I click on D2. Now if I want to square it, I'm going to use the Shift 6 key. That's a caret. That tells me I'm going to use an exponent. And I'm going to type 2. That's going to put D2 to an exponent of 2. So now I have my mass times my velocity squared. The final thing that's left to do is to divide by the radius. The divide button is just simply the slash. And I now click on the radius. Okay, and that is in cell C2. So my calculation I'm going to do is it's going to always take the value from column B, times it by the value in column D, square that value, and then divide by the contents of C. And if I hit enter, it gives me a value of 4.32. The final thing that's left here to do is to say I want to do it for every row, and rather than manually type this over and over and over again and avoiding the repetition, we grab our fill handle, we pull it down, and we see that it applies the same calculation to every one of these, and we have now calculated the force. This would go obviously much quicker if I wasn't explaining it for you. You should be able to do this quickly on yourself, but this is how this works. The final thing that's left to do is that if you notice when it brought these values over, it brought over a lot of decimals. I might not want that. There's a simple way to fix this, because if I just click on this here on the column itself and I scroll over, we have a couple of buttons here. These buttons over here will decrease the amount of decimals that we use. So for example, if I decrease down, I drop everything down to the tenths place. If I click here, this will take it to the hundreds place. I would be happy with this at this moment, so I will stop here. So hopefully what you were able to do was you learned how to take values that were in a spreadsheet and then apply an equation to solve stuff out, and use the fill handle to apply the formatting to a whole row of data to repeat to avoid repeating the unnecessary repetition. Hopefully this lesson was helpful. We'll see you in the next lesson.